Good morning. Thank you for joining us this Sunday morning at Colonial Hill Baptist Church. I'm Ernie Armstrong, and it's my privilege to lead in Bible study this morning from Colonial Hill. A short while ago, someone approached me and said, I've been watching these Sunday school presentations for a good long time. Do you realize you say that same thing every single time? It's my privilege to lead in Bible study this morning from Colonial Hill. And no, I didn't really realize that. But it is and has been truly a privilege to be allowed to present God's Sunday school lesson each Sunday morning, or almost every Sunday morning, for a long time. I tried to look back to see how long. And the best I can come up with in my own mind is approximately 40 years ago. Miller Robinson approached me on a Sunday morning in December with snow on the ground, and he didn't approach me, he called me and said, I know you've already prepared a Sunday school lesson for your Sunday school class. We're not going to have church services this morning, but we're on TV. I'm going to give my sermon. And he said, Ernie, could you give the Sunday school lesson? And we did it from the pulpit in the church sanctuary, and we basically have been doing it ever since for 40 years. Why do I go into all of that? Well, this is my last Sunday to present this Sunday school lesson. My wife and I are moving to the Holy Lands. For those of you who pause and say, you're going to Israel? That's the biblical Holy Lands. We're going to the area around Baylor University, surely the Holy Lands. My place will be filled at this lesson podium will be filled by Jim Palmer. You know, many of you already know Dr. Palmer and know what a great Sunday school teacher and a man of God he is. It's been said that a successor is seldom able to match or replace the one who has preceded. Obviously, that's not going to be the case now. Dr. Palmer is who we should have turned to as a church for years to do this. Because he will do such a great job at it. That said, let's now look at this Sunday school lesson, which is found in Mark chapter 6. We're in a study from the book of Mark, and Dr. Palmer will continue this study as he presents the lessons starting next week. But a little bit of the context. Mark 6 tells that Jesus has selected his 12 disciples, and he has sent them out 2 by 2 to minister, to heal the sick, and to tell the story of the gospel, the good news. Chapter 6 also tells us of the horrible killing of John the Baptist by Herod, solely to please his daughter's whims, or maybe his stepdaughter's whims, based upon his wife's desire to get rid of John the Baptist, because he was critical that Herod married his brother's wife, the mother of this child. That brings us to our focal passage for today, which is verses 30 through 44. It's a passage that is very, very familiar, I'm sure, to all of you. It is the story of the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. And that really is wrapped up in just 2 verses, but as always, there's more for us to glean from God's Word than just 2 verses. We also have a setting in this miracle of the feeding of 5,000. By the way, it is the only miracle of Jesus that is contained in all four Gospels. Matthew, certainly Mark, as we're studying today, Luke, and John. We studied this a little bit when we studied John's Gospel a couple of quarters ago. Verse 30, our starting verse, says, the apostles whom Jesus had sent out 2 by 2, in verse 7, by the way, the apostles gathered together with Jesus, and they reported to him all that they had done and taught. So in essence, this is a post-ministry gathering and meeting to allow them to tell Jesus how the mission work went, the things they did, what they taught, what they said, the miracles of healing that they performed. And then in verse 31, we read, then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. Now, this is the third time in our study, this I think is our 4th week's study from Mark's Gospel, that Mark reported that the crowds had become so large that it was difficult for Jesus to do his ministry. In chapter 1, verse 33, Mark reported that the whole city had gathered at his door after Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law. And then in chapter 3, verse 20, Mark reported the crowd gathered again to such an extent that they could not even eat a meal. I think that was last week's lesson, maybe it was a week before. And now here we see it again in chapter 6, verse 31, as I just read it. Many people were coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. They is Jesus and the disciples. So Jesus knew that they needed a time to rest. And the principle of rest, especially associated with our ministry, but generally a general concept, the principle of rest is an important one, which of course is often overlooked in our busy American culture. It's almost as if it's a crime to get rest. Everyone is supposed to be busy, busy, busy. But we too need rest. Think about it. In the Ten Commandments, the most basic statements of morality, God included a day of rest. Keep the Sabbath holy. God knew that we needed it. He put it in the Ten Commandments. He did not design us for a 24/7, 365-day a year work. He designed us to need rest. And we do ourselves harm when we do not get the appropriate rest. Sometimes rest itself will help us get more done in the long run. Jesus knew that his disciples, who had been out on this mission of traveling around 2 by 2, by foot of course, staying in strangers' houses and such, needed to come away and get some rest. And so he said, come away by yourself. Let's look and break down that verse. Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. That's verse 31, as we read just a moment ago. Come away. Sometimes we need to get away from that place where we are so hectic and busy. Jesus said, by yourselves, but with me, that is, with him. We need to get away from all the people who are keeping us so busy. But if we include the component of including Jesus in our time to get away, we're better off. He said, let's go to a secluded place, away from the stress and the busyness, where we can physically recuperate and rest. Let's don't do more work. Let's don't be too busy, but instead, occasionally, let's rest. How long? He says, for a while. You and I need some time to rest. The amount of time certainly varies, but we all need a while to do it. Each of these aspects of Jesus' statement to them, come away by yourselves to a secluded place and rest for a while, are important. It's important. It's an important principle of an important principle called rest. One commentary said, many people in our church really need this particular word from the Lord. But you might say, I thought this was about Jesus' miracle. We're going to get there. Verse 32 says, so they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. I think it's John's gospel, but it may be Luke's gospel that says this place is Bethesda. I said that wrong. This place is Bethsaida, which is the home place of Peter and Andrew, his brother, and Philip. And some even suggest it may also be the home place of James and John, who are cousins of Jesus. I'm sorry. Well, they probably are cousins of Jesus, but they're partners with Peter and Andrew in the fishing business. I think there's more evidence that their fishing business has moved to Capernaum, where Jesus, close by Capernaum, where Jesus called them into discipleship with him. Anyway, verse 33 says, but many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd. So let's pause there. Jesus and his disciples get in a boat and they start across the Sea of Galilee. They're going from northwestern part of the Sea of Galilee to the northeastern part, approximately 4 miles across at the northern end of the Sea of Galilee. But some of the people who have been crowding in upon Jesus and his disciples from all the way back to chapter 3 see him and his disciples going across the lake, and they began following them, not in boats, but on foot. They run around, and it's a sort of a curved landscape at the northern end of the Sea of Galilee. And I just envision them looking out and pointing out towards the lake. The Sea of Galilee is a huge lake, and saying, there they are, there they are. And as they ran around following the path that Jesus and his disciples are taking in the boat, they come across small villages and more, and people say, what are you doing? We're following Jesus. Let's run ahead. We're going to run ahead. He is able to heal. And the crowd got bigger and bigger and bigger until we see in verses 33 and 34, illustration of the caring ministry, the caring portion of Jesus' ministry. As I read, but many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. Nobody knows exactly today, nobody knows exactly where Bethsaida was actually located. And I did some reading. There are several different ideas about where it might have been located, but it would have been a small place. It would have been secluded. It would have fit, or the area around it would have fit Jesus' plan to get away to a secluded place for his people, his disciples, to get some rest. Those who were interested ran around. Jesus and his disciples rowed in the boat. It doesn't say that, but that's how they would get across. They didn't have motors. how they get across the lake. They ran approximately 8 miles around the northern edge of the Sea of Galilee, while Jesus and his disciples rowed in the boat approximately 4 miles. Verse 34, when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them many things. Okay, we see Jesus do 3 things here. He sees a large crowd. He felt compassion on them or for them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And thirdly, he began to do something about it. He began to teach them many things. We see this type of 3-pronged aspect of recognizing ministry in several different areas of the different Gospels. Matthew chapter 9:36 reads, seeing the people, he felt compassion for them because they were distressed and dispirited like sheep without a shepherd. Matthew 14:14, when he went ashore, he saw a large crowd and felt compassion for them and healed their sick. Even others in stories that Jesus told, such as the story in Luke 10 about the Good Samaritan who was on a journey. He came upon the man who had been beaten. I'm going to paraphrase, he stopped, he felt compassion, and he bandaged up the wounds of the injured man and took him a place where he could be safe, to the inn where they could take care of him. Also, the story of the prodigal son from Luke chapter 15 reads, chapter 15 verse 20, so he got up, that's the prodigal son, and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him and ran and embraced him and kissed him. We see these 3 things over and over in the Gospels. Jesus, and as we pointed out, others saw a need, felt compassion, and did something about it. So this is not only a pattern of ministry for Jesus, it's something we can and should imitate in our own lives. See a need, feel compassion for the one who is needy, and do something about it. But this process can break down in any one of those 3 places. If we don't see the need, intentionally or otherwise, we don't notice it. If we see it, but we don't feel compassion, then there is nothing that is done. Finally, even if we see it and feel compassion, but don't do anything about it, then the ministry doesn't take place. So, what are your thoughts when you come across a situation where you can tell there is a need? Do you feel compassion? Do you act on it and do something about it? And if not, what are your excuses? I must admit that I have excuses in many instances. Jesus could have had an excuse himself. He and his disciples needed rest. That's why they rowed across the lake in the first place. He needed a break from acting on his compassion for others. But he didn't take that excuse. Instead, he felt compassion and he did something about it. He began to teach them many things. And eventually, he fed them as well, which is the miracle we're going to touch on. So we ought to be like Jesus. We've said before in these lessons, our desire should be to be like Jesus. And so rather than making excuses, let's ask God to help us see the needs, to feel compassion, and maybe most importantly, to do something about it. And we're going to see how the apostles, the disciples, responded. And there'll be another point in the lesson for us to study. By this time, verse 35 and 36, by this time it was late in the day. By this time is after Jesus has been teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. So how do you think Jesus responded to them? Their suggestion that he send them away so that they could go and get something to eat. He said, verse 37, you give them something to eat. We are not to just shrug off our responsibilities for the well-being of other people to someone else. We should take responsibility for it, as Jesus is directing his disciples to do, to take responsibility for the needs. Pastor Sean Thomas says, I think this is one of the biggest failures that we have as Christians. We don't take personal responsibility for ministering to people. Often when we see a need, a spiritual need especially, but often physical needs affect spiritual needs, we think that the pastor should do something about it, or maybe the deacons, or let's let the younger people, they have more energy, or let's let the older people, they have more time and wisdom to do it. In other words, let anybody but me take care of it. But Jesus' words here to us, as well as his disciples, is you do something about it. So ask yourselves, as I ask myself in studying this lesson, what do I do? What should I do when there is a need and compassion says that need needs to be met? What do I do? Do I come up with an excuse, or do I step forward? And that brings us to the last part of today's lesson, which is the miracle and Jesus' provisions for accomplishing the miracle. So after Jesus said to them, you give them something to eat. We've already talked about excuses. What excuses did the disciples come up with? The disciples who've just been out on mission journeys themselves, what excuse did they come up with? Well, the second part of verse 37 says, they said to him, after he said, you take care of it, you do something. They said to him, that would take more than half a year's wages. Some translations say 200 denarii. Calculations would say that's a half a year's wages at that time. I think it, again, I can't recall, I think it was John's Gospel where it says that Philip is the one who asked that, who did the calculation and came up with the question, are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? Jesus' response to them, again, is setting up this miracle. Some of the other gospel accounts suggest that he is going to perform this miracle as, in essence, a testimony, a showing of proof that he is the true bread of life. But here, that's not so much Mark's purpose. Mark reports that Jesus asked them when they said, do we spend a half a year's wages to buy them some bread? His response was, how many loaves, that is of bread, do you have? Go and look. And when they found out, they said, 5, that's 5 loaves of bread, and 2 fishes, or 2 fish. So why do you think Jesus asked them to see what they actually had, what their resources were? For one, it probably tremendously demonstrated that they didn't have enough resources to feed the people on their own. If they had a lot more, if they'd gone around and they found that people brought food and they could report back, we sure, and then spread it around, they could have said, we sure did a good job of stretching that food, didn't we? But here, as it was, there is no way that 5 loaves and 2 fishes would be able to feed even 5 people, maybe not even that many. So it made it very obvious that this was indeed a miracle from Jesus. In verse 39, another interesting verse, he commanded them all to sit down, meaning all the people, the 5,000 men. And again, I don't recall which other gospel account says, and there were women and children in addition to the 5,000 men. He commanded them all to sit down, to literally to recline. Remember, that's how they ate. They leaned, they reclined, in my mind's eye, on a couch. They reclined on their right side and with their hands ate from the table. They were to do so by groups on the green grass. Some commentaries said this was should be a reminder to us of the 23rd Psalm. He maketh me lie down in green pastures, and he provides for his sheep. He is the good shepherd. Why did Mark mention the green grass? Maybe it illustrates the time of year. If it's winter, it probably wouldn't have been green grass. Is it just to give us a picturesque scene? I doubt it's either one. I suspect he may have had some idea about the 23rd Psalm as well, and saw how that might have been encompass the same ideas that David wrote about 1,000 years before. And Mark and Peter, who is Mark's main source, relates it because that brought that idea up to him. Verse 40 says, they sat down, reclined, in groups of hundreds and of 50s. Why did Mark give us that detail? What does that indicate? Well, it may indicate organization. Jesus had them very organized. Sometimes people in church think organization is something from the devil. It's not. Jesus had them organized in groups of hundreds and 50s to distribute the food in an orderly, well-organized manner. It was not going to be some chaotic cattle call with everyone pushing and shoving and grabbing. They were going to sit and wait for the food to be brought to them. Paul, later in the New Testament, in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 40 says, let all things be done decently and in order. Jesus models that for us here. Organization is not a bad thing. It's a side point here, but what are some ways organization can be beneficial for the work of the church? Well, it can help us keep track of people. In our different Sunday school classes or small group gatherings, we can know when somebody is not coming, is missing, so we can reach out to them and see if they have a need and try to meet it. Organization certainly can and should help us stay on budget. It can and should help us know where people can serve. We have spiritual gift surveys, and we have dream teams where people with specific spiritual gifts can serve in specific areas. So organization does not have to conflict with spiritual worship. Verse 41, and we're getting to the end of our session. He says, and he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up toward the heaven, he blessed the food and broke the loaves, and he gave them to the disciples to set before them. And he divided up the 2 fish among them all. A couple of things here. Only Jesus could have done this. He blessed the food. That is what we need in so many cases in our own life, our own church, our own family, our own country. We need Jesus to do what only Jesus can do. He took the 5 loaves and 2 fish and fed all these people. If Jesus can do so many things that we need him to do, let's look to Jesus. And how did he do this? How did he give the food out? He kept giving them to the disciples to set before him, and Jesus didn't give it himself. He gave it to his disciples, and they gave it to the people. I'm sorry, I was reading my notes. Again, here's some organization. He didn't do it all by himself. This is a good message for a pastor, lay leadership, Sunday school leadership. He used his people. He provided the organization, the impetus, and the miracles, and he had them to carry out the miracles. Verse 42 says, they all ate and were satisfied. In other words, they got all that they wanted. They were fully satisfied. One commentary said, it's like we are when we get up from Thanksgiving dinner. Verse 43 and 44, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces and of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000. Just 2 verses that summarizes the greatness of the miracle. Why did they do that? Why did they pick up the 12 basketfuls? It certainly is an illustration of the magnitude of the miracles. There is more left over than they had to start with. And this verifies and demonstrates how miraculous it was. So in summary, what is God asking you to do these days? Has he laid a certain ministry upon your heart? Is he calling you to a closer walk with him? What needs do you see around you that need to be filled? Yes, you can say, I don't have the resources. I only have 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Give it to God. Turn it over to Jesus, our Lord and Savior, and he will supply what you and your own resources cannot. No matter what, focus on the task, not the obstacles, not the excuses, and then use whatever resources you do have after you have given it all to Jesus. What a lesson. What a miracle. What a privilege it has been to present these lessons to you over the years. Thank you for studying with us and for all your support all this time. Let me wish you a great day, a great future in the Lord's presence. Thank you and good day.